All right. So we're in stewardship season. Yay. Actually, yay. So the last couple of weeks, we're talking about calling. The question that we asked last year that stuck in people's minds the most, myself included, after talking about what's your lived experience of God? How do you find that in St. Anne's? The question that was really poignant was, what would you do if St. Anne's went away? And it was a sobering reminder of the importance of good stewardship of our resources. And then it occurred to me this year, another question to ask to get us to think instead of internally, externally as well, is what would happen to Fremont if St. Anne's went away? Now, that's not to make you worry about whether or not we're going to survive. It's to get us to think about what our purpose actually is in Fremont and the surrounding areas, to really hone in on what that means. Last Sunday, we talked about what is a calling and how do you find yours. The calling is that thing that you can't escape, that is the thing that makes you feel the most alive, that brings you closest to God, your neighbor, and transforms you into your fullest and most grounded self. This week, we want to look at what is St. Anne's calling as a congregation. Just as each and every person here has your own unique calling, because calling is not simply for the clergy, it's for everyone. What we bring together and find as our uniting purpose together is what makes St. Anne's call a thing. And also, it's what we uniquely offer to the world that makes us vital and necessary for our beloved community. So I'm going to kind of contextualize that a little bit with the gospel this morning. Again, as I said last week, it's a bummer that all these really rich stories from Scripture that are really good for preaching are all during the time when I'm trying to do an expository series of sermons, and all the gnarly texts were the ones that I had to preach on whether I liked it or not. But that's beside the point. So, a lot of times the story was Zacchaeus. I'm sure you all probably grew up with that song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Okay, so some of you knew that. It made him out to be this adorable little man, poor guy. He just, he was down on his luck, he was short, so he had to climb a tree, and Jesus was like, we're going to hang out. And he's like, yay! Not realizing that basically he was the worst of the betrayers of his own people. He was a greedy, wealthy man who extorted people out of their money and extorted other tax collectors out of their money and served the empire that was oppressing the people of God. So think of someone who might be the most corrupt, tax-based, business-based, political-based person. Don't say any names, just think of that person. Think of the person that frustrates you the most for corruption. Imagine if that person came into the church and let's say Jesus was here, and instead of talking to any of you or me, he went first to that person. How would that feel?
Oh.
Yeah. It's easy to judge the Pharisees and the scribes because, they're self-righteous, legalistic people. But the reality is, they were good people who were frustrated with the fact that their nation, their way of being, was being completely hamstrung by people who didn't care about them and saw them as a means to an end. So you've got factions of the Sadducees who are the wealthy elite. If you can't beat them, join them. They're the ones that are appointed by Rome, so they're already, the social elites. You've got the Pharisees who are trying to figure out how to build a hedge around Torah and utilize ancestral stories of how to contextualize it and how to live well and trying to care for people, but are also very rigid in their viewpoints. You've got the Essenes who are way out in the wilderness saying, you know what, we're just going to give up everything. We're going to try not to have any food, any sort of, they were celibate, and there weren't a lot of women, and for some reason they didn't work out. But they lived out in the desert, and they lived in intentional communities. It's where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls. Very apocalyptic, by the way. And then there's this weirdo named Jesus of Nazareth. Now, he's got a combination of all the different groups except the Sadducees, primarily because the Sadducees did not believe in resurrection and only believed in written Torah. Now, why am I telling you all this, and what does it have to do with the price of bread? Well, there are different groups with a different sense of calling for how to be the people of God. For better and worse, they were all trying to figure out, how do we be faithful to our God, our covenant in our community? And each one had unique things they brought to the table. What Jesus did with this situation was he had a unique calling in this experience, a unique way of understanding what that looked like that wasn't set apart from all the other groups that he was involved in. There are a lot of commonalities there, but he had a unique calling in the midst of all that and bridged gaps that other groups thought were, like bottomless chasms. So Jesus, in his attempt to restructure how we understand how to relate to people, particularly those whom we want to love the least, brought a very unique and necessary way of understanding things in his own time and place that was both connected to his own roots and also its own critique of its own roots. Which is to say, there's room for commonality and there's room for unique gifts and callings. So we are a small Episcopal parish in the Diocese of California in the Episcopal Church of the United States, part of the Anglican Communion. All through that entire thread, we're still part of a very small group of people worldwide. We're not actually a very big church. The fact that we have 2 million Episcopalians, that's tiny. That is exponentially smaller than all the other denominations out there. But we have a unique calling, where we are the church of the both and. We talked yesterday about the importance of how when Elizabeth decided to try to solve the problem between Catholics and Puritans killing each other over minutiae of doctrine, she smooshed it together in the prayer book, had both side by side, and said, "Play nice or I kill you." And what she did with that, whether that was entirely political, was an incredible blessing because it baked into our DNA a unique expression of the Jesus movement that when it evolved into what has become the Episcopal Church, we are a broad tent church. There is so much room for all kinds of people. And that is a neat overarching thing that is the unique gift, the unique calling of the Episcopal Church in the Anglican Communion, in the church writ large. What I want to explore today, and what we're going to talk about when we get into small groups, is what it is that makes St. Anne's unique. What it is that you find is the collective sense of who we are, what we offer, and why it might be important to our surrounding communities. So who are we? What's our history? What is our story? Why is it important to Fremont? Take a moment. I want you to think about what you've seen throughout your time here. For some of you, it may be a very short time. For others of you, it may have been your entire lives or the entirety of the church itself. What have you seen consistently is the unique calling that this congregation has. How does your calling tie into that? These are big, swirly questions, and they're hard to answer, which, again, is always why I like to ask them, because the questions keep asking themselves. But get in groups of 2 or 3 and ask yourselves and share your story. What do you see as the calling of St. Anne's based on your experience? And bring your story into why you think that is the case. Zoom crowd, I'll take you up to the altar as usual, and we'll go from there. Talk amongst yourselves.